Welcome to The Jungle, where we discuss social science and applications to business and society. My name is Doug Lepisto, and I am co-founder of Sleeping Giant Capital and the Center for Principled Leadership and Business Strategy at Western Michigan University. Alison, welcome to The Jungle.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Tell me a little bit about your background. We've got some sparkles here. What is this behind you?
Oh, my physical background.
Yeah.
They're a remnant from my old house in North Carolina. They're 3D.
Yeah.
They're metal. The best I can
Okay.
describe them is they're like sea urchins and they screw into the wall. And I had them in my old house and I moved here. I'm like, where am I going to put these? So I put them in my office, but that was pre-Zoom, right? So now that I'm on Zoom, it always looks like I have some kind of like halo or tiara or stars because my head like aligns
I was just
with
saying,
them.
you look like you're sparkling is what it looks
Totally.
like. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was great. Well, exciting to have you on the podcast. Would love to just give you a quick background of how I got introduced to your work. My wife, I'm not sure where, came across your book and started reading it on vacation and was like, "This is the best book I've read in a long time." And she's a very avid reader. And I would consider, my wife, Kristen, a likable badass for sure. Someone who is, assertive and warm, always trying to add the warmth to the, and not replacing, but, compensating, but adding the warmth. And so then I read the book and, as a fellow academic, I'm interested in the science behind it and, the lessons and the practices. But for me, I think the thing that was so interesting was how this advice matters for young people. So as an educator working with undergraduates, this matters a lot. So I would love to talk a little bit more about that. But the other hat I wear is I manage a kind of a place-based private equity fund here in West Michigan. So we're investing behind aspiring owner operators who want to acquire businesses. Most of those 99% of folks on the other side are men. And we've got, a few women and really I would call likable badass aspiring CEOs who are looking to buy companies. And, we're also trying to, change the condition that, 95% of the folks who come through our doors are guys who are looking to buy companies, become CEOs. And, we're not accessing the other 50% of the population that would be fantastic CEOs. So, we've tried to make an effort to, open the doors to, increase the number of women who come to us, who can be really talented. And I think are in some ways be better leaders maybe than their male CEO counterparts. So just, that was the whole impetus for us to sit down together. And then my wife organized a book club, Think and Drink. And they read it, that book. She read the book with 20 of the undergraduate women in our program. And they just had a fantastic experience. And so I was like, man, I really wanted to sit down and talk to you less about the book. And I know I mentioned that we wanted to go beyond the book in our conversation today. Where I really wanted to go was how we can create environments for building more likable badasses, more people with warmth and assertiveness. So I think on page 65 of your book, most of what people know about you comes from you, how you talk and write about yourself and how they see you behave. And so what I'd love to do today is talk a little bit about how we as outsiders can confer, can see, can assess, can coach other people as they build this perceptions of warmth and competence. So that's what I was hoping to start with today, but would love to get just a little bit of background from you. So you're an organizational psychologist,
Yep.
Ph.D. trained, do a lot of speaking, a lot of writing. Seems like you've been an entrepreneur a little bit in your career, a little bit maybe non-traditional. Would maybe love to just hear a little bit about where you are today in your career and kind of what got you to this point where you're now a sought after speaker, writer, based on your research, because it's not a path that every academic takes. So why don't we start there?
Yeah, I mean, didn't even grow up dreaming of being an academic at all. I started as a consultant for McKinsey, and I wasn't sure if I liked that, but I thought I would. But I realized very quickly when I was there that it wasn't for me. Some of the stories I tell in the book are just kind of bad luck, and other ones were fundamentally that the work didn't light me up. But it made me think about what did I really like, and I always had liked human behavior. I'd always liked psychology. I had only dabbled in it. I had never pursued it. I didn't know how to pursue it, but I thought maybe I could figure that out. And that's when I discovered, oh, there's this whole field called organizational psychology, which in that point in my life did not know existed. And I thought, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Human behavior applied to work seems like it would combine the things that I knew and was interested in. And so there I went, off to get my PhD. And I did a lot of work in negotiation and influence, a lot of work in power and status, teaching and speaking and researching in those topics. And that's how I eventually evolved into serving women. That was also not a plan or a goal. It was just that in my all, male dominated audiences, I would find that it was always the women who would approach me after the class or after the presentation to say, "Hey, can I talk to you?" And in those conversations, they would talk about a challenge they had, whether it was getting paid or promoted or getting, their male clients to talk to them and not want to always insist on talking to their boss and things like that. And I realized that I had two things to offer. One was that because as a woman myself, I was a safe space to be able to talk through personal experience. And then also that my day job was immersing myself in all this behavioral science. And it just was natural for me as I'm reading all this stuff because it's my job to think, oh, how could I use that? And to just bring it into the way that I was living and working. And so I realized that we could do a better job serving women with the science that we were producing, that we weren't really talking about how it could be used to address gender-based challenges. That kind of brought me here. And now, since the book um, it launched in September, I have been doing even more and more work for women's groups. It's brought people like your wife who didn't know I existed into my world, and I've gotten all these great opportunities to be able to serve more women, which I love.
So I'm going to encourage obviously everybody to have the book here, read the book. Very accessible, great practical strategies on really this idea of, I mean, tell me if I get this wrong, but self-management of status, self-management of and finding that management, those strategies that can influence how other people see you in terms of your warmth and your assertiveness, and with the assumption being that it's really in the eyes of the other that really is where status lies. And so it's partly a self perception, but it's really in the eyes of others, and it's something that you can change, and that you can change it with deliberate strategies. And you go over some great, even these little things around eye contact, humor. I love the advice you have on building a network of folks to promote you, the email introductions. I have some of my students use some of those practices, collecting the no's. We did that, talking to strangers, doing a scary ask. Some of these I had started before I read your book, and I'm like, okay, now I've got science to really reinforce that. But where I would love to go is I'd love to talk a little bit about how we as leaders, educators, create these environments where you can have more warmth and assertiveness out of people. How do we build as leaders the capacity to be able to see people this way? So maybe we start off, and because this, a lot of the book is on self strategies. How do we think about outsiders building those capabilities? So how about we start with seeing? So how do we as leaders better notice warmth and assertiveness, or coldness and submissiveness? And how do we better see this in those that we're leading, or those that we're working with in the classroom?
Yeah, I mean, you only can see what people show you, all right? So I think one thing I would say about how do we observe it or cultivate it is that we can act on is to build confidence in other people. Because when people feel confident, they are naturally going to act in ways that are more assertive and more warm. Because and so that whole idea, and this is something that's very maddening for women in particular, when you get feedback to be more confident, that we have a lot of science on this, that confidence, even overconfidence, is perceived as competence, right? Because I can't see how competent you really are. I can only see what you're showing me. And so when you come in and you're like, I've got this, you think they've got it. They must know what they're doing. So there is a confidence to perceived assertiveness link, which is very favorable. And when we feel confident, that's also when we're generous and warm. We're not competitive because we're very secure in what we're doing. Insecurity is one of the biggest reasons that people are not warm and not giving, is because they see everybody else as a threat. So one action that we can take as mentors, sponsors, allies, whatever it is to, when you see something in somebody, it doesn't have to be warmth or assertiveness specifically, but when you see something great in somebody, even a small moment, you have to build their confidence. And when you compliment them and when you point out what's great, in the same way that I do for my kids, right? Um, what you're trying to do is to say, if you have a strong sense of self and your own abilities, it will naturally lead you to behave in ways that are going to convey more assertiveness and warmth. So that's something that we have a lot of control over. And I think about my own life, and I had a lot of great teachers when I was young in school, right? That do build your confidence. And you can have teachers that, as undergraduates, that build your confidence, and that shapes your idea that, oh, I can do this other thing that, it's totally different. So I think that's one um, thing that we can do to draw out that behavior of people, and then we can ultimately observe it.
So is confidence as a precondition to letting people be themselves, and
Right.
that authenticity then kind of hopefully unlocks some of the warmth and the assertiveness there, and then we can calibrate the coaching on where they need to go.
That's right. And look, not all confident people end up being, very warm. They're probably pretty assertive. So in terms of seeing how someone is, you can get arrogance, right? When people are really confident, but you'll see a little bit of draw out who they can be. And then, yes, they're either going to showcase their likable badass self, or they may need to be coached or redirected.
So I think one of the great, I think my wife would agree with this. I mean, one of the areas I absolutely love is taking students, in particular undergraduate students, often women, who I would say are at least conveying signs of lacking confidence. And that's a big deal when you're 20 and your sense of professional identity is not formed, and you're going through a lot of growth, a lot of personal growth. What advice do you have for folks who are coming in and you are seeing signs of lacking that confidence to begin to start to unlock it? What advice do you have for that?
I just say you build it. You pull them aside and you say, by the way, you're amazing. And here's why. And you got to offer some specifics to it. And as you know, people, you don't always believe someone the first time, especially, and we've all had moments where we fundamentally doubted ourselves and we lacked confidence in an area. And one compliment doesn't necessarily solve the problem. But over time, when you start to get the feedback from the outside world, you are good at this, it does change your self view. So we have to be part of the feedback from the outside world to say, you're good at this, to be specific about it, to repeat it, to point out to them, do you see how other people are actually deferring to you and listening to you and how you're influential, et cetera? And with enough of that narrative, you can shape it. But it also doesn't happen in one compliment or overnight. And so when we really care about people. And when we think of areas where we are confident, it's repeated interactions over time, perhaps with different people, where we've heard enough of the same message from different people to say, oh, okay, I believe them now. But so we may not be able to single-handedly do it, but we can start that and play that role.
So we're seeing maybe a lack of confidence. We're trying to build them up to have the confidence to be able to start to, in some ways, create a container to kind of coach them on building their warmth, building their assertiveness. Let's talk a little bit about how you label these things when you're in a relationship, trying to coach someone to build this. Do you use warmth and assertiveness? Do you use likable badass? How do you talk about building those capabilities that you talk about in the book? What's the language you use?
They use that. It just depends on the situation. Sometimes I'm just coaching them on a specific behavior. So I'll give you an example. I was at a conference a month or two ago, and many of the participants there were MBA students, but not students that I taught, not students that I knew. But one woman had been a conference organizer. So I had worked with her a bit, helping to bring me in. And a lot of the students, their motivation for working this big conference was job connections, because the conference speakers were industry people. And she got introduced to a room of very, very high profile women, and they said, "Oh, hey, what do you want to do with your career?" And she knew, I knew she knew because I asked her, and she told me like what she was hoping to get out of this conference and the connection she was able to make. And she gave a very vague, like wishy-washy answer. Like, I don't know, I'm just kind of figuring it out. And I pulled her aside and I said, "You're not figuring it out. You know what you want to do." I said, "You got to go in there with a specific, this is what I'm looking for, because people want to help you and they can't help you with, I'm still figuring it out." So I didn't really, it wasn't a likable badass answer, but I didn't coach in those terms. I just said, you need to give a specific answer about what you want to do, because that will, I mean, it will show I know what I'm going for. It creates that sense of determination and persistence and competence. And it also allows people to help you. So I think it just depends. But part of writing the book, I would say a lot of people reflect back to me, whether they're really senior or just starting out, that having the vocabulary does help them see the world in a new way. And that these things have always been happening under their nose. I didn't invent anything, but I'm just talking about aspects of human behavior they hadn't really thought about. So, so sometimes I do use those words to say, here's what's ultimately happening in the eyes of your audience, right? You have to, they're deciding who you are on these two dimensions.
Do you use, I mean, I wish I had it with me. One of the students in the book club created these little nameplates, name tags that said, my name is blank and I'm a likable badass, right? And so it's really an identity, right? Being a likable badass, something that you can grant to other people or that you could claim. Do you use that language as yeah, it's in the book, but you use it as like an identity that you as in comes some ways with a smile that you're a likable badass, right? Do you use that in your coaching, and or would you recommend that for leaders?
I do. One of the reasons I use the term is one, it's a reference to an underlying scientific truth, right? That status comes from people believing that you care and believing that you're capable. So it's research based, but I did it because it's catchy. It feels like it's something that people say, that's what I want to be. And that's what I'm going for. And what I wanted to show people was the things that people expect of you that actually get you rewarded are actually the same things that you want to be anyway. So even though it's annoying to have to live up to other people's expectations, in this case, it's not a problem, because don't you want to be a likable badass? And everyone's like, 100%, that's what I'm going for. I do use the term. I'm careful because I wrote the book about not overusing the term myself, because I don't want to feel like I'm a walking book advertisement and that that's the only way to talk about it. But it does help people understand very quickly those two dimensions and how they are trying to embody those two dimensions simultaneously.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about a specific student right now who I would a 22-year-old guy, I would say incredibly warm, not very assertive. And really over the course of a semester, we're working on a practicum and really trying to help build up that assertiveness. And I think about the story you tell at the beginning of the book that half of one of your classes who came up to you were starting to give some talks about these ideas were men, right? Because men also want to be they want to be warm and they don't want to be a jerk. And so how do you think about the coaching that you give on women versus men? Obviously, as you point out in the book, women have a uphill battle as it pertains to these perceptions and the biases there. How do you think about the coaching you do with men and women as they build up those both warmth and assertiveness?
It does not really look all that different. I mean, my choice to write this book for women was truly a personal one because it's an audience I care about. I could have written the exact same book, albeit with slightly different stories and examples for women, because none of the science has anything to do with gender. Um, so when I think about advising people, a couple things. One is sometimes if you have low ascribed status, so you hold a characteristic that you don't control, that the world has devalued, like gender for women, it could be race, sexual orientation. When you hold a lower status ascribed characteristic, there's definitely some frustration and confusion about the bias that the world has shown you and why does that happen. So when I work with women as an example, I might spend a little more time explaining that, but I always say most people are going to have high status identities in some contexts and lower status ascribed characteristics in other contexts. And so even if someone is a man, in which the case they might have higher ascribed gender status, they could also be contending with other things, right? People like feel like they're low status because um they're career switchers, right? They come to school with a very different background and they're not a quant person and everyone's a quant person, and status in this world comes from, being a numbers person, whatever it is, everyone contends with something. So I don't always coach people all that differently when it comes to the fundamentals. But I think when you have somebody who is from a systemically marginalized or low ascribed status group, helping them understand that one, the situation isn't their fault, but the solutions still are very much within their own control. Because sometimes there's a sense where you get somebody who has almost given up to feel like it's such an unfair system and game, why play? And so I have to do a little bit more cheerleading there to say, no, 100% you're gonna play and you're gonna win. It's just that we're gonna play really smart.
Hmm. The, I think about some of the male students that are, uh, on their leadership journey, and I would say that most of them struggle with being assertive. They tend to want to be, warm, especially, they're leading some of their peers who are, similar in age, and the assertiveness piece is always difficult. Um, for me, that I feel like I'm a great coach when it comes to building up the assertiveness. Don't know if I'm such a great coach, as it pertains to building up the warmth, because I think that's kind of how I am. How do you see your own? I'm imagining you tend, I don't know if I'm remembering this wrong, more towards the assertive and then adding the warmth. How do you think about your own, somebody who's a leader, their own makeup as they coach others to build those two competencies?
Yeah, I'm gonna step back to what you said about it's hard to be assertive with your peers. So this is not in the book, but some research that I did on what my colleagues and I called lateral deference. The hardest situation to be in is trying to corral a group of peers because when there is no hierarchy, you're very concerned about essentially losing status by acting like you have too much status, right? You can't act like you're in charge when it's a group of peers. So there's that whole dance that has to happen. Like someone needs to be in charge because otherwise we don't get anything done. But I just can't step up and say, okay, people, here's what we're doing, like I could if I were in the boss. So I have to kind of use these deferential strategies. And that actually is smart to do. So it's not that they lack assertiveness perhaps across the board, but they have to approach those peer situations with a little more deference and submissiveness. Otherwise, they'll get punished because people will say, who put you in charge? So that's very natural. It's very hard. So if someone's struggling with that, I would let them know that's the hardest situation for people to be in. It's way harder than managing up or managing down. Managing across is the hardest. And also put yourself in situations where you could have different relationships so that you can naturally see how you behave differently. On the coaching the warmth, what I try to help people think about is how you can always do whatever it is you're doing and turn it into service to other people. So my oldest son just turned 16. He just got his driver's license yesterday. And I'm always trying to coach him on this because he's a super nice kid. He doesn't lack niceness, but he lacks strategy of thinking about how do I make other people's lives better? Not because he's trying to make their lives worse, just doesn't think about it. So as an example, and again, he's not far off from being a college student. As an example, he wanted to borrow some computers for the school because he wanted to do web scraping to pull like every Major League Baseball statistic off the web. And he wrote code to do it, but realized he had to essentially parallel process with multiple computers. Otherwise, it was going to take like 40 hours. He's like, I don't have 40 hours. So he wants to borrow laptops. I said, that's great. Go. And he's like, I'm going to go ask to borrow the laptops. I said, fine. Well, here's what I also want you to do. When you borrow the laptops, don't just say, can I have the laptops? Tell them what you want to do with it, because I think that they'd be more inclined to help you because it seems somewhat ambitious, and offer when you're done to either share the data because you already scraped it or to go into the computer science class, because that's where you're borrowing the computers from, and say, hey, if this is helpful to anybody to like show my code or talk about what I did, I'm happy to do it, right? It makes you look expert, but it's also maybe it's helpful to the teacher and you can put yourself in a position of service. So I think in terms of dialing up the warmth, what I always think about is how can I take what I'm doing anyway and then use it to make somebody else's life better? And that I think is a mentality shift that once you start thinking about it, you're like, I was like, that would take you 2 seconds to do. And of course, he's a teenager, so he pushes back and he says, Mom, they're just going to let me borrow the computers anyway. And I said, that might be true, but why you're not taking a simple step that's going to, one, make you shine and look smart in front of the class while you're also being helpful is a wasted opportunity. It's a wasted opportunity to build that relationship. So I think it's not a lack of warmth that I see in people. It's a lack of strategizing about how could I take a little extra step to make someone else's life better. And, all kinds of other things like just, like, I mean, even in my life, I got a very different life than most of, the students we're talking about. But things like now I get a lot of women who reach out to me and they want time for me. And if I were retired, I'd love nothing more to like sit on my rocking chair and just chat with all these women. But I got 3 kids, I'm traveling all the time. But I always think, what can I do? And I think, all right, I've got 3 pockets of time in my calendar that I know are almost always wasted time. Standing at a gate, waiting to board an airplane, sitting in the back of an Uber or taxi, and sitting in a car waiting to pick up my kids, which hopefully I'll do less of now that I have a driver. And so I always think, like, how can I, without derailing my life, try to give moments of time to people who want my help? And otherwise, what would I be doing? I'd just be scrolling my phone, kind of, just standing there. So I think about things like that, like just a mentality of how could I maximize the number of people I help by thinking of creative ways to do what I'm already doing and be a little bit more giving. So that's what I would really coach people on. And I think the best way to do it is like, what do you naturally like to do? What do you like, what do you, because if you're passionate about something, then helping advise people, coach people, whatever, um, it doesn't feel like work. It feels like your passion.
So let's talk a little bit of bump it up. I know you're an organizational psychologist. Let's talk about norms and practices in organizations. So if we wanted to increase the prevalence of warmth and assertiveness, you could select on those, and as a first step. And I'm curious, are there assessments or are there tools that you would advise organizational leaders if they wanted to really identify those folks that really had a great, likable badass approach?
I don't think assessment's the way to go because the idea is, right, these are fundamental qualities that all human beings possess in the right context. I yet to see somebody who is never honest, generous, giving, sincere, warm. They're just not always that way. And some people are all in some contexts are always going to be competent and organized and decisive, except we all have warmth and assertiveness. We all care and we're all capable in the right context. I think it's really about the leader's biggest challenge, which is not selecting the best people, it's creating the right environment for those things to shine. Um, why wouldn't somebody be very capable? I mean, maybe they're selected for the wrong job. So if they don't have the skills, that could be an issue. So you can select on skills, less on personality. But also maybe, right, been um, they've been treated in a way that's caused them to retreat, right? They've been overlooked. Their ideas haven't been given any weight. They stop contributing because they don't think it matters, et cetera. We've created the environment that haven't allowed them to show up in that way. So I would think as a leader, really focusing on a couple of things. First is you have to walk the walk. If you can't do those things yourself and cultivate that sense of assertiveness and warmth, people are paying attention to you. This is mostly how we learn how to show up in the world is from watching other people around us. So if the people we're watching are bad at it, we have no hope of lecturing them to be good at it or selecting them to be good at it. So we have to start with ourselves to say, I know how to show you that I care while I'm, very capable. And if people need something to read, specifically on the boss front, I tell them to go read Radical Candor, which is essentially about the same thing from the perspective of being a boss, Kim Scott's book, right? Show people that you care while also being able to drive results. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we can tell when we are feeling respected. You can sense it, right? People don't use those words, but you can get tell who respects you and who doesn't, right? When you talk, someone listens or someone, talks over you, or when people come in late to meetings versus when they're sitting there on time, with the pen in hand, ready to take notes. So the second thing we can do as leaders is respect the people we want everybody else to respect. If we want people to value them, we have to value them. And if we do, people will pay attention. If someone keeps coming to you to ask your advice and you would say, why are you asking me? Right? The expert here, is Doug. You should be talking to Doug about this. And if that person reads, right, the boss really respects Doug in these things, that'll be a cue to me. Like I should respect Doug in these. Doug knows what he's doing. Um, so I think that those are the things that we should be thinking about is creating environments of respect and then also paying attention to when people around us are disrespecting other people because that's the main reason people leave work is they just don't feel valued, particularly women. And we just let it, we don't do anything about it. We're either not paying attention to it or we don't know how to legislate it. So we just leave it be. But even senior women, when they're in situations and they have a lot of power and they're getting paid a lot of money and they're not well respected by the people around them, life feels miserable. And if they have options, they leave. So I would really focus on that culture of starting to pay attention to respect and who just like sit in a meeting and just watch. Be like, who's respected in this room and by whom? And you can tell. And then to think, is that right? Or do I want to change that? And if I want to change it, especially if I have my own status in the organization, I have the ability to be able to confer that and shape how other people behave.
So let's dive in a little bit more on the building the environments. Do you have any examples of organizations or teams, classrooms even that have been really effective in institutionalizing practices, whether they're rituals or routines that really help build that sense of respect or help take an organization and build in warmth or build in more assertiveness kind of systematically that people could learn from?
Seen some practices, um, some things like meeting management, for example, in terms of leaders as facilitators, structures of controlling airtime, passing the baton, speaking in reverse seniority so that the least senior people speak first so that they can get airtime without having to feel like they have to conform to the opinions of more senior people, things like that. I think those kind of practices can be helpful. And I have seen some, but I do think, and this is what is hard about status, and maybe why we probably don't manage it as well as we should organizationally yet, is that it's not something that you can just put a rule on a wall and walk away and be like, my job is done. It requires people to show up. Again, your status exists in other people's minds. So you can't legislate it unless people are agreeing to go along with it. And you can't make somebody respect somebody else. You can make somebody treat somebody else in A, B, and C ways, but they can still do that without, respecting that person. So I think it's important for them to think about practices. Like, what am I seeing? Do I have a problem? And if I have a problem, maybe it's, the interns always say that they, get talked over. Okay, I can do something about that as a leader. I can create a norm or a practice. But fundamentally, what I have to do is just keep my eyes open day in and day out, to be able to say, are, is kind of the respect hierarchy working as it should? And if it's not, how do I, what can I do as an individual to get more respect?
So
Sort of, what can I do as an individual to influence how much this bigger audience respects this person or set of people?
you've had, I'm imagining, a lot of conversations with leaders, managers, employees, across different sectors about your book and strategies. Speculate for me, step back and kind of look at the state of work today. Are you seeing a need to add more warmth on average, or is it a case of trying to build up more assertiveness in kind of modern work today?
It's a good question. I mean, so I'll say something based on my own research, which is that the more we work interdependently, the more we value warmth. So when someone is, when we, that sometimes if we don't have to, if I don't have to collaborate with you, I'll be willing to tolerate that you're smart, but you're a jerk because it doesn't have much impact on my life. And if you can drive results, that's fine. The closer you come to my world that I have to actually work with you, the more I care about warmth, to the point that I will care about it even more than your assertiveness and your capabilities. So, if we think about work today, I do think that, we're both more interconnected and more independent at the same, depending on the situation. Right? We're more interconnected because it's so much easier for us to collaborate even at distances. At the same time, um, we are now post-COVID often working more independently physically because we are remote or we are, taking meetings via Zoom. So I think both things can happen at the same time. We can collaborate more and we can also be more distant. And those have implications for what we value. The more we work together, the more we're going to seek out warmth and the ability to collaborate. The more independent we are, the more we can see we value assertiveness. So, although they're both important and putting them together is always the winning combination, what we've seen in some of my own work is we don't always value the two of them equally.
I'm almost seeing, if I just look at younger people, and the next generation of leaders, I see deficits in both warmth and assertiveness, particularly as they come into a professional environment. On the one hand, warmth meaning like interpersonal presence, eye contact, being able to give praise really effectively, smiling, uh, that embodied presence is a capacity young people, in my experience over the last, been teaching here for God, almost 10 years, has gone down post COVID and technology. And then you throw in AI and I see in some ways just the basic skills and habits of being seen as warmth as a challenge. And then at the same time, I see a lot. This has gotten better post COVID, but a lack of assertiveness, a little more of a malaise, a little more of a, I wouldn't, kind of the proactive, putting your point of view out there, driving the results. That there's almost a hesitancy to really have more of a commanding presence. I mean, sometimes I even talk to my students like, I just want you to go out there and let's just, spend between now and the next class session just trying to be dominating in your presence, because they just don't, they haven't, they're so reluctant to stand out, to assert. And in that way, I'm thankful for your book, because I think you really, both those two things with the introduction of technology, and you throw in AI and you get these responses that they're not warm. They're pseudo warm. They're fake warm. So that, at least that's what I'm starting to see with young people.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you in the sense that it- you know generations are essentially cultures. So I always tell people, they ask me a lot about how does likable badass translate across cultures, and they say, well, what we know is we across cultures we value people who are caring, and we also value people who are capable. Now, what changes dramatically are what are the signals that are indicators to me that you're caring? What are the signals that are indicators to me as you're capable? So if you go across national cultures, something that might show confidence in one situation might be pure arrogance or inappropriate in another situation. Something that's friendly in one context is gross or weird in another context. So that will change how you show it. I think that's true when you think about generations. When I look at how my kids communicate with each other, I think, oh my God, I would never talk to somebody like that. Is that your friend? Like, of course we're friends. That's how we chat. But I also recognize that's not my culture. I don't know. I also think that we rewrite history a bit in the sense that I don't have a perfect memory of who I was as a high schooler or a college student, but I'm pretty sure that I've changed and I've evolved in better ways and worse ways, and that 17-year-old me and 20-year-old me and 50-year-old me are not all the exact same person. And it's easy when we go back and we see people who don't have this skill set to think, back in my day, I did all of these things. And I'm not sure that's as true as we think it is. I was probably less assertive, less articulate, less giving, et cetera. Now, maybe not in the exact same way that my kids are, but I do think that we failed to remember what that was like. But here's the other thing: is we are all products of our environment. We were what the world expected of us, and so if we're seeing different things, it's because the world is expecting different things of them, not because human psychology has fundamentally changed in one generation. And that if we want a certain set of behaviors, again, if we compliment them, if we coach them, if we reward and punish based on them, people very quickly fall into line. Like I'm I'm training a new puppy right now, right? It's like you can take any being and show them the rules and show them these are the rewards and these are the punishments, and they like learn pretty quickly. So I do think that if we aren't seeing that as much as we saw it in ourselves at that time, it's because we are rewarding and punishing different things. And I I don't know where that leaves us, but I also see that although I think my kids, as an example, might lack skills that I pride myself on having, at least at this point, I also see they have skills that I don't have as well because they've had to exist and like, navigate technology and think about, they're probably much better communicators at a distance than we are because that's what they do. So I'm not pessimistic about the state of the generations, but I do think the way I'd see it is it's a cultural difference. And I do talk in the book at the end about mentoring and the idea that we all should be in both roles. Like a lot of the questions we've talked about today are about how we can mentor people who are younger than us or coming up in their careers. But I also think it's important that we need to be mentored as well by people at all stages, including being mentored by people who are of these generations, which is it's not always you're not going to basically win as the leader, as the boss by saying I'm older, I'm more powerful, do it my way. It's just a very short-sighted way to be, to say how can I reach you, like what is it that's going to drive you, what is it that's going to bring out the best in you. And a lot of times when people ask me like how should I be motivating Gen Zers, Gen Alphas. I say, why are you asking me? I'm a Gen Xer. Why don't you go find a Gen Alpha or a Gen Z and like engage in a conversation of legitimate curiosity, not lecturing, not telling them how you were better when you were their age, but a legitimate, like, how do you see the world? What do you care about? What matters to you? And then, and talk about that and think, okay, how can that affect how I show up in a way to, kind of draw out the best in them? And it may not be the version that I want to create, but a version that is consistent with who they want to be.
So let's wrap up by switching context real quick, and I'll put my other hat on, which is as an investor working alongside aspiring CEOs. So these are 35 to 50-year-olds, and they're trying to build relationships with sellers of businesses, and they are going from 0 to 1 on that relationship. There is, if anything, we've learned over the last few years of doing this work is just how important those relationship building skills are, and how consequential they are to if you can actually get a deal done. So let's say I'm a 40-year-old mid-career post MBA experienced person. I'm deciding to go on this entrepreneurial path. I'm going to buy a business, so I'm going to be engaging with sellers. Let's say I'm a woman. And let's say that 99% of the people on the other side of the table are men. They're 75. The brokers that they're working with are men. The accountants and the lawyers and the advisors they're working for are men. And I'm in this context of needing to build a lot of credibility and relationship building quickly in that kind of environment. What advice would you have for aspiring owner operators in that point of, especially women who want to become CEOs?
Yeah, so I'll say two things. First is the greatest basis of liking and attraction that psychology has ever documented is similarity. We instantly like people the second we find out that they're like us in some way. And so the challenge that we have in a situation like you're describing is when I look different than you, if I don't do anything, your brain will just conclude that we are different. And that's not favorable for you trusting me, liking me, respecting me, wanting to sell to me, all of those things. So the number one thing you can do in a short period of time is to get people talking, do your research. I mean, we live very public lives now. You can find out a lot about people in 10 minutes on the internet. Chat GPT is a great friend of yours in that regard. And to say, tell me what you know about this person, and to find a point of similarity. And then to highlight those things, because that's going to be your entryway to that person saying, okay, you're like me. And that's why there's been so many same gender old boys things for so long, is because, oh wait, you look like me, right? We're the same. And then we start chit-chatting about the same thing. You can do that cross gender easily, but you got to find the thing. So I would say find the thing, and it doesn't have to be work related. I mean, ask questions to get people talking about their lives, whatever it is. And when you hear something that you're like, ding, 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 that's me too, pause there and be like, yeah, me, same. Because that's where you create that connection. And that's something you can do in that like quick intro coffee or lunch that can get that person inclined to, to want to work with you. It could even be like, we know the same person. We went to the same school, whatever it is, dig it up, and that works. But then the other thing I would say is that um, familiarity also breeds liking. So most of the time I talk to people, like they have this vision of going and pursuing this entrepreneurial path, buying this company. They didn't wake up this morning and say, I'm going to do that. And then at noon, they're at lunch with somebody to buy a company. That idea has been brewing for a long time while they have been still working their job, trying to see if they could like save up the resources, take the risk, make the leap, etc. And I know this because my husband did this as well. And I would say the second you wake up in the morning and say, that's what I think I want to do with my life, that's the day you start talking about it, trying to build the relationships, because it's so much easier to build relationships when you don't need anything from somebody. And so you may not be able to access like that exact person that you're eventually going to be talking to about buying their business, but to say, who do I need to know in this space that's going to help me? And how can I start adding value? Get to know them, first of all, if they don't know I exist. And then, second, how can I start adding value to their lives? Maybe it's somebody who's a great super connector. And you think, hey, when it comes time, this is the person who could probably call any one of these owners and get them to meet with me. Okay, well, how can I make that person's life better? Because if I've been doing that for 18 months, it's going to be a lot easier. And so that doesn't help you if today you wake up and you have the meeting. But what I would say to people who are listening or thinking about this is do not wait until that's your most emergent project. Lay the groundwork from the moment you have the idea. And by the time you start to work on it, you're going to have lots of people who you can call, who can intro you to people, who can talk you up and build your status, get you in the door, all of those things, and to use those second and third degree connections to be able to do it. But it takes a little bit of time. And I think the biggest mistake people make about status is they don't care about it till they need to rely on it. And I would say like it's hard to build the plane like while you're flying it that regard.
Well, Allison, really appreciate you taking time to talk. I think your work is so important. It's relevant whether you're young, whether you're old, you're a man, you're a woman. Some of the things that you started to put into practice, especially around the introductions, I've started to do. Just to kind of build out that. I mean, it's an easy way to benefit others and build your network. So hopefully we'll get you here to Kalamazoo, and just wanted to thank you for your work and thanks for taking the time.
I love it. Thanks for having me.